Marcus Wellington stepped out of his black Rolls-Royce, adjusting his diamond cufflinks as he surveyed the grand palace gates before him. At 45, he had built an empire in real estate that stretched across 3 countries. His sharp suit cost more than most people earned in a month, and he wore his wealth like armor. Today was supposed to be simple. A charity auction at the royal palace where he would write a check, smile for cameras, and add another good deed to his public image. The palace grounds buzzed with activity as other wealthy donors arrived for the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. Marcus had donated generously to this cause for years, not out of genuine concern, but because it looked good in business magazines. His assistant had already briefed him: bid on something expensive, shake hands with the right people, and leave with his reputation enhanced. As he approached the main entrance, Marcus noticed the ceremonial guards standing at attention. These weren't ordinary security guards, but members of the Royal Guard, an elite unit that had protected the monarchy for centuries. They wore pristine uniforms with golden buttons and stood motionless despite the crowd flowing around them. One guard in particular caught Marcus's attention. The young man couldn't have been more than 25, with serious dark eyes and perfect posture. His nameplate read, Officer David Chen. Something about the guard's humble appearance irritated Marcus. Here was someone who probably earned in a year what Marcus spent on a single dinner. Marcus felt his phone buzz with an urgent message from his business partner. A major deal had fallen through, a billion-dollar project that would have cemented his status as the city's most powerful developer. The text message was brutal in its simplicity. Wellington Holdings rejected. They chose Morrison Group instead. We lost everything. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Morrison Group was run by James Morrison, a man Marcus had publicly humiliated at a business conference months earlier. This rejection wasn't just business, it was personal revenge. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. His hands shook as he read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood. Rage bubbled up inside him, hot and uncontrollable. He needed someone to blame, someone to absorb the fury that threatened to consume him. His eyes fixed on Officer Chen, who continued to stand guard with unwavering dedication. To Marcus, the guard represented everything he despised: humility, service to others, contentment with little. Without thinking, Marcus strode directly toward the young guard. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble steps as he closed the distance. Officer Chen remained at attention, trained never to break protocol regardless of what happened around him. This only fueled Marcus's anger further. You know what you are? Marcus snarled, stopping inches from the guard's face. You're nothing. A decoration. A puppet in a fancy costume. His voice grew louder, drawing stares from other guests. I make more money in a day than you'll see in your entire worthless life. Officer Chen's eyes flickered slightly, but he maintained his position. Years of training had taught him to endure insults and provocations. He had dealt with drunk tourists, angry protesters, and entitled visitors before, but something in Marcus's voice was different, more venomous, more personal. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, waving the screen showing his substantial bank balance. See this? This is real power. This is what matters in the world. Not standing around like a statue pretending to be important. The crowd began to gather, sensing drama unfolding. Marcus felt their eyes on him, which only intensified his need to assert dominance. He had built his reputation on being feared and respected. He wouldn't let some palace guard make him look weak, especially not today when his business empire was crumbling. I could buy this entire palace, Marcus continued, his voice echoing off the stone walls. I could buy you, your family, your entire pathetic existence. His face was red with anger, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth as he spoke. Officer Chen finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. Sir, I understand you're upset, but I must ask you to step back and allow other guests to enter. His tone was respectful but firm, exactly as he had been trained. This response only enraged Marcus further. How dare this nobody tell him what to do? How dare he remain calm while Marcus's world was falling apart? In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He gathered saliva in his mouth, drew back his head, and spat directly into Officer Chen's face. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation stopped. Every camera phone turned toward them. Officer Chen stood frozen, the spit slowly dripping down his cheek. his dark eyes now burning with something deeper than anger. Marcus felt a moment of satisfaction, believing he had finally broken the guard's composure and asserted his dominance over someone he viewed as beneath him. The moment seemed to stretch forever as Officer David Chen slowly raised his hand to wipe the spit from his face. His movements were deliberate and controlled, but those who knew him well could see the storm brewing behind his calm exterior. The crowd of wealthy donors stood in shocked silence, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Marcus Wellington felt a surge of triumph. He had shown everyone who held the real power here. In his mind, he had just demonstrated that money could humiliate anyone, even those who served the crown. He straightened his tie and prepared to walk into the palace as if nothing had happened, but Officer Chen didn't step aside. Instead, he reached for his radio with steady hands. "Command, this is Chen at the main entrance. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Request backup and senior officer presence." His voice carried across the courtyard, clear and professional. "What situation?" Marcus scoffed, his confidence still intact. "I'm a major donor here. You can't do anything to me." He waved dismissively at the gathering crowd. "These people know who I am. They know what I'm worth." Within minutes, 6 additional guards appeared, moving with military precision. Their leader was Captain Sarah Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s whose reputation preceded her. She had served in the military for 15 years before joining the Royal Guard, and her steely gaze could make hardened criminals confess their crimes. "Officer Chen." "Report," Captain Rodriguez commanded, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Sir, this individual approached my post, verbally assaulted me, and then committed an act of physical assault by spitting in my face. Multiple witnesses can confirm the incident." Officer Chen's report was crisp and factual, showing no emotion despite the humiliation he had endured. Marcus laughed, but the sound came out forced and nervous. "Assault? It was just spit. I'm Marcus Wellington of Wellington Holdings. I've donated millions to royal charities. You can't seriously be considering this assault." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Mr. Wellington, spitting on a person is legally classified as assault in this jurisdiction. Spitting on a member of the Royal Guard while they're performing their duties is considered an assault on a representative of the Crown. This is a serious criminal offense." The color began to drain from Marcus's face. Around him, the crowd murmured among themselves, and he could see phones recording every moment. Social media would have this story within minutes. His business reputation, already damaged by the lost deal, was about to become a complete disaster. "Now wait just a minute," Marcus stammered, his arrogance beginning to crack. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this quietly. I'm willing to apologize and perhaps make a substantial donation to the Guard's pension fund." But Captain Rodriguez was already speaking into her radio. "Dispatch, we need a patrol unit at the palace main entrance for an arrest. Suspect is a white male, approximately 45 years old, charged with assault on a royal guard." She turned back to Marcus. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't how wealthy men like him were treated. He was used to problems disappearing with the right phone call or the right amount of money. But as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he realized that some institutions still operated beyond the reach of his influence. The crowd watched in fascination as Marcus Wellington, one of the city's most powerful men, was led away in handcuffs. Cameras flashed and videos recorded every step of his humiliation. The man who had built an empire on intimidation and displays of wealth was being treated like any common criminal. Officer Chen remained at his post, his face cleaned and his uniform straightened. But inside, something had changed. For years, he had endured the subtle and not-so-subtle contempt of wealthy visitors who saw him as nothing more than decoration. Today, one of them had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As the police car drove away with Marcus in the back seat, Captain Rodriguez approached Officer Chen. "You handled that well, David." Textbook response to provocation. "The whole incident was captured on security cameras, so there's no question about what happened." "Thank you, Captain," Chen replied, but his mind was already working. He had recognized Marcus Wellington's name immediately. Wellington Holdings was one of the largest real estate companies in the country, with developments across multiple cities. But Chen knew something about Marcus Wellington that the arrogant businessman had never suspected. David Chen wasn't just a royal guard living paycheck to paycheck. He was the eldest son of Chen Industries, a multinational conglomerate that his grandfather had built from nothing. The family business included manufacturing, technology, and real estate investments that dwarfed Wellington Holdings. David had chosen to serve in the Royal Guard, not because he needed the money, but because he believed in serving something greater than himself. He had kept his true identity secret for 3 years, wanting to earn respect through his service rather than his family name. His fellow guards knew him as David Chen, dedicated officer. They had no idea that he was David Chen, heir to a business empire worth over $50 billion. As he stood guard for the remaining hours of his shift, David made a decision. Marcus Wellington had humiliated him publicly, believing that wealth gave him the right to treat others as less than human. It was time for Mr. Wellington to learn that there were consequences for such behavior, and that sometimes those consequences came from the most unexpected places. Marcus Wellington sat in the cold, sterile holding cell, his expensive suit wrinkled and his confidence shattered. The past 6 hours had been the most humiliating of his life. First the arrest, then the booking process where he was fingerprinted and photographed like a common criminal. His one phone call had gone to his lawyer, who was already working on bail arrangements. The story had exploded across social media faster than Marcus could have imagined. Videos of his arrest played endlessly on news channels and Twitter. The headlines were brutal. Wealthy developer spits on royal guard. Billionaire's meltdown caught on camera. And when money can't buy respect. His business phone had been ringing nonstop until the police confiscated it. Meanwhile, David Chen had finished his shift and returned to his modest apartment near the palace. To anyone who visited, it looked like the simple home of a dedicated public servant. But hidden behind a bookshelf was a secure door that led to a private office equipped with multiple monitors, secure communication lines, and direct access to Chen Industries' global network. David sat at his desk and began making calls. His first was to his younger sister, Lisa Chen, who served as the company's director of strategic operations. She was brilliant, ruthless in business, and completely loyal to her family. "Lisa, it's David. I need you to run a complete background check on Wellington Holdings and its CEO, Marcus Wellington. I want to know everything, his business practices, his debts, his enemies, his secrets, everything." Lisa was intrigued. David rarely used his position in the company for personal matters. "What happened? This sounds personal." David explained the incident, his voice remaining calm and controlled. Lisa listened in growing anger. Her brother had always been the gentle one in the family, choosing service over profit, humility over power. The idea that someone had humiliated him publicly made her blood boil. "Consider it done," Lisa said. "I'll have a full report within 24 hours. But David, if you want my advice, we shouldn't stop at just gathering information. This Marcus Wellington needs to learn that actions have consequences." Within hours, Lisa's team of investigators and financial analysts began dissecting Wellington Holdings like surgeons examining a patient. What they found was fascinating. Marcus Wellington's empire, while impressive on the surface, was built on a foundation of debt, questionable deals, and borrowed money. The recent loss of the billion-dollar project had left him more vulnerable than anyone realized. The investigators discovered that Wellington Holdings owed substantial amounts to several major banks. Marcus had used his properties as collateral for multiple loans, betting everything on continued growth and successful deals. The loss of the Morrison Group contract had created a domino effect that threatened the entire company's stability. More interesting was Marcus's personal history. He had built his reputation on being tough and uncompromising, but the investigators found a pattern of bullying behavior toward employees, contractors, and anyone he perceived as beneath him. Former employees described a toxic work environment where Marcus regularly humiliated staff members. Several lawsuits had been quietly settled out of court. Back in his cell, Marcus finally made bail the next morning. His lawyer, Thomas Griffin, met him at the courthouse with grim news. "Marcus, we need to talk. The assault charge is just the beginning of your problems. The story has gone viral and it's not pretty. Your board of directors is meeting this afternoon to discuss your future with the company." Marcus felt sick. Wellington Holdings wasn't just his business. It was his identity, his legacy, his proof to the world that he mattered. "They can't remove me. I built that company from nothing. I own controlling interest. Actually, Griffin said carefully, your controlling interest is complicated. Remember those loans you took out last year? Some of the paperwork includes clauses that could trigger a review of your leadership position if the company's reputation is significantly damaged. As they walked to Griffin's car, Marcus noticed people staring at him. Some pointed and whispered. A few took pictures with their phones. He was no longer Marcus Wellington, respected businessman. He was Marcus Wellington, the man who spat on a royal guard. That afternoon, David Chen visited his father, Henry Chen, at the Chen Industries headquarters. Henry was 70 years old but still sharp as a razor. He had built the family business through careful planning, ethical practices, and an understanding that true power came not from intimidating others, but from earning their respect. Father, I need to tell you about something that happened yesterday, David began, and he explained the entire incident. Henry listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When David finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. This Marcus Wellington sounds like a man who has forgotten that wealth is a responsibility, not a weapon. What do you plan to do? I want to teach him a lesson about respect and consequences, but I want to do it the right way, legally, ethically, and completely. Henry smiled. Then you have my full support. Sometimes the universe puts people in our path who need to learn important lessons. Perhaps we are meant to be his teachers. That evening, Lisa Chen presented her findings to David and their father. The presentation was thorough and devastating. Wellington Holdings was far more vulnerable than anyone suspected. Marcus had overextended himself, made enemies in the business community, and created a company culture based on fear rather than respect. Here's what's interesting, Lisa explained, pointing to financial charts on her screen. Wellington Holdings has been trying to expand into the Asian market for 2 years. They've approached several of our subsidiary companies for partnerships, but we've always declined. They don't know that Chen Industries owns those companies. David studied the information carefully. What would happen if his current creditors decided to call in their loans simultaneously? Complete financial collapse, Lisa replied without hesitation. He's been juggling payments and using new loans to pay off old ones. If the right pressure was applied at the right time, Wellington Holdings would fold within weeks. Henry Chen leaned back in his chair, considering the options. The question is not whether we can destroy him. Clearly we can. The question is whether we should, and if so, how to do it in a way that teaches him something valuable rather than simply ruining him out of spite. David had been thinking about this all day. I don't want to destroy him completely. I want him to understand what it feels like to lose everything because of his own actions. I want him to experience the humility he tried to strip from me. Then we proceed carefully, Henry decided. We'll apply pressure gradually, giving him opportunities to change his behavior and make amends. If he chooses to remain arrogant and unrepentant, then he'll face the full consequences of his actions. The Chen family was about to begin a carefully orchestrated campaign that would either humble Marcus Wellington or completely destroy everything he had built. The choice of which outcome occurred would ultimately be his. Marcus Wellington's week went from bad to catastrophic. The viral video of his arrest had been viewed over 10 million times, and news outlets were running stories about his entitled meltdown. His company's stock price had dropped 15% in 3 days, and several major clients were reconsidering their contracts. The emergency board meeting had been brutal. Marcus sat at the head of the polished conference table, facing 12 board members whose expressions ranged from disappointed to furious. His longtime business partner, Robert Hayes, led the charge. Marcus, this isn't just about one bad day, Robert said, sliding a tablet across the table. The publicity from your arrest has opened floodgates. Former employees are coming forward with stories about your behavior. The media is digging into every aspect of our business practices. Marcus scrolled through the articles with growing horror. Headlines screamed about his pattern of abuse and toxic leadership style. Former employees described incidents where he had humiliated them in front of colleagues, made unreasonable demands, and created a workplace culture based on fear. This will blow over, Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. People have short memories. We just need to weather the storm. Board member Patricia Wells, a woman Marcus had often dismissed in meetings, spoke up. Marcus, we've received calls from 3 major investors threatening to pull their funding. The Grand Harbor project is in jeopardy, and the Peninsula development deal is being reviewed. This isn't just bad publicity, it's a business crisis. Unknown to Marcus, David Chen was orchestrating events from behind the scenes. Chen Industries had quietly reached out to several of Wellington Holdings' key partners and investors. They didn't threaten or make demands. They simply asked thoughtful questions about due diligence and risk management that made people reconsider their associations with Marcus. Lisa. Chen had been particularly effective in these conversations. As a respected figure in international business, her concerns carried weight. When she mentioned to investors that they might want to review their partnerships with companies facing reputational challenges, people listened. Meanwhile, David continued his duties as a royal guard, maintaining his cover perfectly. His colleagues had no idea that he was systematically dismantling the business empire of the man who had humiliated him. To them, he was just David Chen, the quiet guard who had handled a difficult situation with remarkable professionalism. The first major blow came when Transcontinental Bank called an emergency meeting with Marcus. He sat across from Bank President Victoria Chen, Lisa's aunt, though Marcus had no idea of the connection. Victoria was known for her conservative approach to lending and her ability to spot troubled borrowers before they defaulted. "Mr. Wellington, we need to discuss your loan portfolio with us," Victoria said, her tone businesslike but not unfriendly. "Recent events have raised some concerns about the stability of your company." Marcus tried to project confidence. "Victoria, we've been banking partners for 8 years. You know, Wellington Holdings is solid. One piece of bad publicity doesn't change our fundamentals." "I'm afraid it's more than publicity," Victoria replied, opening a thick file. "Our risk assessment team has been reviewing your portfolio since the incident at the palace. We've identified several areas of concern that were overlooked in previous evaluations." She laid out documents showing Marcus's debt-to-asset ratios, cash flow projections, and recent business losses. When viewed together, they painted a picture of a company living beyond its means and one major setback away from serious trouble. "We're not calling in your loans immediately," Victoria continued, "but we are requiring additional collateral and updated financial statements within 30 days. We're also implementing new reporting requirements to monitor your company's performance more closely." Marcus left the bank feeling shaken. The additional scrutiny would make it much harder to manage his cash flow problems. Worse, if other banks followed Transcontinental's lead, he could find himself facing a coordinated financial squeeze. That evening, Marcus met with his lawyer, Thomas Griffin, at an expensive restaurant downtown. Marcus had chosen the location hoping to project normalcy and success, but even the maitre d' seemed to recognize him from the news coverage. "Thomas, I need options," Marcus said quietly, leaning across the table. "The banks are circling like sharks, the board is questioning my leadership, and the media won't let this story die. What can we do?" Griffin had been researching the situation extensively. As a lawyer who specialized in crisis management for wealthy clients, he had seen similar cases before. "Marcus, you have 2 paths forward. The first is to fight this head-on, hire a public relations firm, threaten lawsuits against anyone spreading negative stories, and try to outlast the controversy. And the second path? Take responsibility. Make a genuine public apology to the guard you assaulted. Demonstrate real change in your behavior and business practices. Show the world that you've learned from this experience." Marcus recoiled at the suggestion. "Apologize to that guard? He's nobody, Thomas. I'm not apologizing to someone who makes in a year what I spend on wine." Griffin sighed. He had expected this response, but he had to try. "Marcus, your pride is going to destroy everything you've built. The public wants to see accountability, not more arrogance. Then we go with option 1. Hire the best PR firm money can buy. I didn't build this empire by backing down to anybody." As they spoke, David Chen was having dinner with his father at the Chen family's private dining room. The room was elegant but understated, reflecting the family's preference for substance over flash. Henry Chen had always taught his children that true wealth was quiet wealth. "How is our friend Mr. Wellington responding to recent developments?" Henry asked. "Exactly as we expected," David replied. "He's choosing confrontation over contrition." His lawyer tried to suggest an apology, but Marcus refused to consider it. Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Some people must learn their lessons the hard way." "Very well. We continue with phase 2 of our plan." Phase 2 involved Chen Industries' extensive network of business relationships throughout Asia and North America. Over the next week, several of Marcus's international deals began falling apart. Partners cited changing market conditions and strategic realignments, but the real reason was simple: Chen Industries had better relationships and more attractive partnership opportunities. Marcus watched helplessly as a major development project in Singapore collapsed when his local partner suddenly withdrew. A planned expansion into the Japanese market stalled when potential investors mysteriously lost interest. Each failure was subtle enough to seem like normal business fluctuations, but the cumulative effect was devastating. The most painful blow came when Marcus learned that Morrison Group, the company that had beaten him for the billion-dollar contract, had announced a major partnership with an unnamed Asian conglomerate. The partnership would give Morrison access to international markets that Marcus had been trying to enter for years. It's like someone is systematically cutting off every avenue for growth. Marcus complained to Robert Hayes during another crisis meeting. Every deal we try to make falls apart at the last minute. Robert had been thinking the same thing. Marcus, what if this isn't coincidence? What if someone is actively working against us? Who would have that kind of power and reach? Marcus asked. But even as he said it, a cold realization began forming in his mind. His humiliation of the Royal Guard had been witnessed by dozens of wealthy, powerful people. What if one of them had decided to make him pay for his behavior? We need to identify who's behind this, Marcus said grimly. And then we need to fight back. But fighting an enemy you couldn't identify was nearly impossible, and Marcus was about to discover just how powerful his hidden adversary really was. Marcus Wellington hired the best private investigation firm in the city to uncover who was sabotaging his business. For 2 weeks, a team of former FBI agents and corporate intelligence specialists dug into every failed deal, every canceled contract, and every mysterious business reversal. What they found left Marcus stunned. Mr. Wellington, we've identified a pattern, lead investigator James Murphy reported in Marcus's office. Every major setback your company has experienced in the past month can be traced back to decisions made by companies with ties to Chen Industries. Marcus frowned. Chen Industries? I've never heard of them. That's because they prefer to operate quietly, Murphy explained, spreading documents across Marcus's desk. Chen Industries is a multinational conglomerate worth approximately $50 billion. They own manufacturing companies, tech firms, real estate operations, and financial institutions across Asia and North America. As Murphy detailed Chen Industries' vast holdings, Marcus felt his world shifting again. Many of the companies that had recently canceled deals with Wellington Holdings were either owned by or partnered with Chen Industries. The bank that had tightened his credit terms was partially owned by Chen Industries. Even some of his board members had pension funds managed by Chen Industries subsidiaries. Who runs this Chen Industries? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would shock him. The company was founded by Henry Chen, who's now semi-retired. Day-to-day operations are handled by his daughter Lisa Chen and his son. Murphy paused, checking his notes. His son David Chen, who serves as heir apparent to the company. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. David Chen? Are you certain about that name? Absolutely, why? Do you know him? Marcus's hands began to shake as the full scope of his situation became clear. The Royal Guard he had humiliated, the young man he had spat on while declaring his own superiority, was the heir to a business empire that dwarfed his own. The nobody he had treated like dirt controlled more wealth and power than Marcus could ever dream of possessing. Find out everything you can about David Chen, Marcus ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to know why the heir to a $50 billion company is working as a Royal Guard. The investigation into David's background revealed a story that made Marcus feel even smaller. David Chen had graduated from Harvard Business School with highest honors. He could have stepped directly into a leadership role at Chen Industries, but instead he had chosen to serve in the Royal Guard for 3 years. His colleagues described him as humble, dedicated, and completely focused on duty rather than personal advancement. He's been living in a modest apartment and donating most of his guard salary to charity, Murphy reported. His family owns a dozen properties in the city, but he chose to live like any other working person. According to our sources, he wanted to prove himself through service rather than inherit respect through his family name. Marcus sank into his chair as the full irony of the situation hit him. He had built his entire identity around displaying wealth and power, believing that money made him superior to others. Meanwhile, David Chen, who possessed far more wealth than Marcus ever would, had chosen humility and service. Marcus had unknowingly attacked one of the most powerful young men in the business world, while that man was choosing to live as a humble public servant. "Sir, there's more," Murphy continued reluctantly. "Our investigation suggests that Chen Industries isn't finished with their response to your actions. They appear to be building towards something much larger than what they've done so far." That afternoon, Marcus received a call that confirmed his worst fears. Patricia Wells from his board of directors sounded grim. "Marcus, we need an emergency meeting. Sovereign Wealth Management just made an offer to buy 40% of Wellington Holdings." Marcus knew Sovereign Wealth Management was one of the most powerful investment firms in Asia. What he didn't know was that they were a subsidiary of Chen Industries. What kind of offer? A very generous one, but with conditions that would effectively remove you from operational control of the company. "They're offering our shareholders 50% above current market value." Marcus understood immediately. Chen Industries wasn't trying to destroy Wellington Holdings completely. They were positioning themselves to buy it out from under him. Given his company's recent struggles and dropping stock price, many shareholders would find the offer irresistible. "Call an emergency shareholder meeting," Marcus ordered. "I need to address this directly." But even as he made plans to fight the takeover, Marcus knew he was in an impossible position. His company was weakened, his reputation was damaged, and he was facing an opponent with virtually unlimited resources. Worse, that opponent had legitimate grievances against him and the moral high ground. That evening, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, examining his own behavior and actions. He sat in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by expensive art and luxury furnishings that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. On his coffee table lay printouts of articles about David Chen, and what he read forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. David Chen had spent his summers during college building houses for low-income families. He had started a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in public service. Even while working as a royal guard, he had volunteered at homeless shelters on his days off. Every article painted a picture of a young man who used his advantages to help others rather than to intimidate them. Marcus tried to remember the last time he had done something genuinely helpful for another person without expecting something in return. He couldn't think of a single example. His charitable donations were always calculated for maximum publicity benefit. His interactions with employees were based on maintaining fear and control. Even his relationships with friends and family were transactional. The contrast between himself and David Chen was stark and painful. David had been born into far greater wealth and privilege than Marcus had achieved through decades of ruthless business practices. Yet David had chosen to serve others while Marcus had chosen to dominate them. David had earned genuine respect through his character, while Marcus had demanded superficial deference through his bank account. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington began to question whether the path he had chosen was worth the destination it had led him to. He owned multiple homes but had no real friends. He commanded fear from his employees but had never earned their loyalty. He possessed millions of dollars but had never experienced the satisfaction of genuinely helping another person. As he sat alone in his expensive apartment, Marcus realized that David Chen had already won their conflict in the most fundamental way possible. David was a better man, not because of his wealth but because of his character. Marcus had spent his entire adult life trying to prove his worth through accumulating money and power, while David had demonstrated his worth through service and humility. The question now was whether Marcus Wellington had the courage to admit his mistakes and try to become a better person, or whether his pride would drive him to continue fighting a battle he had already lost in every way that truly mattered. The choice he made would determine not just the fate of his business empire, but the legacy he would leave behind. Tomorrow would bring the shareholder meeting that could end his control of Wellington Holdings forever. But tonight, Marcus faced a more important decision about what kind of man he wanted to be. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but Marcus Wellington had been awake since 4, pacing his apartment and rehearsing different approaches to save his company. By sunrise, he had filled a wastebasket with crumpled speech drafts, each one more desperate than the last. The truth was becoming impossible to avoid. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and running out of options. At 8:30, Marcus's secretary called with news that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Wellington, 3 more board members have announced they're supporting the sovereign wealth management offer. That gives them a majority vote even without the external shareholders." Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against his office window, looking down at the city he had once felt he conquered. The people walking the streets below looked like ants from his 50th floor office, just as he had always viewed those he considered beneath him. Now he wondered if perhaps he had been the small one all along. The meeting was held in Wellington Holdings' main conference room, the same space where Marcus had humiliated countless employees and intimidated business partners over the years. Today, he sat at the familiar head of the table, but the power dynamic had completely reversed. The board members who had once deferred to his every wish now looked at him with a mixture of pity and determination. Robert Hayes, his longtime partner, spoke first. "Marcus, before we vote on the sovereign offer, you have the opportunity to present an alternative plan." Marcus stood slowly, looking around the table at faces he had known for years. Some of these people had made fortunes working with him. Others had watched him build Wellington Holdings from a small family business into a major corporation. Now they were preparing to vote him out of the company he had created. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know the past month has been difficult," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "We faced challenges that have tested our company and our leadership, but Wellington Holdings has weathered storms before." Patricia Wells interrupted gently but firmly. "Marcus, we need to address the elephant in the room. This isn't just about recent publicity problems. The sovereign offer comes with a complete restructuring plan that addresses our debt issues, our international expansion problems, and our management concerns." Marcus felt his prepared speech crumbling. "What management concerns?" "The toxic workplace culture that's been documented extensively in recent weeks," Robert replied. "Marcus, we've had 17 formal complaints filed against you personally since the Palace incident. Former employees are coming forward with stories that paint a pattern of behavior that's simply unacceptable in today's business environment." The room fell silent as Marcus absorbed this information. He had always justified his harsh management style as necessary for success, but now he was learning that his behavior had created lasting damage to real people's lives. The weight of those 17 complaints felt heavier than any business loss he had ever experienced. "I can change," Marcus said quietly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I realize I've made mistakes in how I've treated people. I'm willing to undergo management training, implement new workplace policies, whatever it takes." Board member James Morrison, ironically sharing a name with Marcus's business rival, leaned forward. "Marcus, change is admirable, but it's too late for gradual improvements. The sovereign offer includes guaranteed employment protection for all current staff, debt restructuring that will save the company, and leadership changes that will restore confidence in our brand." Marcus realized that his board wasn't just voting on a business transaction, they were voting on him as a person. Years of intimidation, humiliation, and selfish leadership had finally caught up with him. The very people he had dominated were now choosing to align themselves with someone who represented everything he wasn't. The vote was swift and decisive. 8 board members voted to accept the sovereign wealth management offer. Only 3 voted to retain Marcus's leadership, and even they seemed to do so more out of loyalty than conviction. In less than 30 minutes, Marcus Wellington lost control of the company he had spent his entire adult life building. As the board members filed out, making plans for the transition period, Marcus sat alone in the conference room. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Wellington, this is David Chen. I believe we should meet to discuss the future. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Central Park Cafe if you're willing." Marcus stared at the message for a long time. David Chen was offering him a meeting, not as enemies, but apparently as 2 people who needed to have a conversation. The fact that David had reached out personally, rather than through lawyers or business intermediaries, suggested something Marcus hadn't expected: the possibility of redemption. That evening, Marcus went home to his penthouse and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He called his sister Rebecca. She lived in a small town 3 hours away, working as a teacher and raising 2 children with her husband. Marcus had barely spoken to her since their father's funeral 5 years earlier, dismissing her simple life as unambitious. "Marcus." Rebecca sounded surprised to hear from him. "Is everything okay?" "No, Becky, it's not," Marcus admitted, using the nickname he hadn't spoken since they were children. "I think I've made some terrible mistakes, and I don't know how to fix them." For the next 2 hours, Marcus told his sister everything: the incident with the guard, the discovery of David Chen's true identity, the loss of his company, and most importantly, his growing realization that he had become someone he didn't like or respect. Rebecca listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped Marcus examine his own motivations and behaviors. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Marcus, do you remember when we were kids and you used to defend me from bullies at school?" she asked. "You were always so protective of people who couldn't protect themselves. What happened to that person?" Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes for the first time in decades. "I don't know, Becky. I think I became the bully." "It's not too late to find him again," Rebecca said softly. "The brother I remember was kind and generous. Maybe this David Chen is giving you a chance to remember who you really are." After the call ended, Marcus sat in his dark apartment, thinking about his sister's words. Tomorrow's meeting with David Chen could be a confrontation, a negotiation, or something else entirely. But for the first time in years, Marcus Wellington was prepared to listen rather than demand, to learn rather than lecture. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his sense of superiority. But perhaps if he was brave enough to face the truth about himself, he might find something more valuable than any of those things. The chance to become a person worthy of respect, rather than simply demanding it through intimidation. The old Marcus Wellington had died in that boardroom today. Tomorrow he would discover whether a better version of himself could be born from the ashes. Marcus Wellington arrived at Central Park Cafe 30 minutes early, something he hadn't done for a business meeting in 20 years. He had always made others wait for him, believing that punctuality was a sign of weakness. Today he needed time to prepare himself mentally for what might be the most important conversation of his life. The cafe was modest and unpretentious, filled with students, young professionals, and families enjoying a quiet afternoon. Marcus realized this was exactly the kind of place David Chen would choose: public enough to be safe, humble enough to keep egos in check. As he sat at a corner table nursing his coffee, Marcus watched ordinary people living their lives and wondered when he had stopped seeing them as individuals worthy of respect. At exactly 2 o'clock, David Chen walked through the door. He wasn't wearing his Royal Guard uniform, but simple civilian clothes: jeans, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket. Without the formal uniform, he looked even younger than Marcus remembered, but there was something in his posture and expression that commanded respect without demanding it. David spotted Marcus immediately and walked over with a calm, confident stride. As he approached the table, Marcus found himself standing automatically, not because protocol demanded it, but because some instinct told him this young man had earned that courtesy. "Mr. Wellington, thank you for coming," David said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and his voice carried no trace of anger or triumph despite everything that had happened. "Thank you for reaching out," Marcus replied, surprised by how nervous he felt. "I wasn't sure you would want to speak with me after everything." They sat down across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Marcus studied David's face, looking for signs of the wealth and power he now knew the young man possessed. But David Chen looked exactly like what he had appeared to be at the palace: a dedicated public servant who took his responsibilities seriously. "I suppose you know who I really am now," David said finally. Breaking the silence, Marcus nodded. "My investigators were very thorough." "I have to ask them why." "Why work as a guard when you could have anything you wanted?" David smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Marcus had seen from him. "Because I could have anything I wanted. My grandfather built Chen Industries from nothing, working 18-hour days and treating every employee like family. My father continued that tradition. I wanted to understand what it meant to work for something rather than inherit it. And what did you learn? That the most valuable things in life, respect, friendship, purpose, can't be bought. They have to be earned through how you treat others, especially those who can't do anything for you in return." Marcus felt those words hit him like a physical blow. For most of his adult life, he had treated people based on what they could do for him. Employees were tools to be used, competitors were obstacles to be crushed, and anyone without money or power was simply invisible. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, the words feeling awkward and unfamiliar. "What I did at the palace was inexcusable. I was angry about other things, but that's no excuse for treating you the way I did. You were doing your job with dignity, and I tried to humiliate you because I thought I was better than you." David listened without interruption, his expression serious but not hostile. "I accept your apology, Mr. Wellington. But I'm curious, do you understand why what you did was wrong beyond the fact that it had consequences for you?" The question forced Marcus to examine his actions more deeply. "I think I'm beginning to. I spent so many years believing that money made me superior to others that I forgot we're all human beings deserving of basic respect. I turned wealth into a weapon instead of a responsibility." "That's a good start," David said. "Now I want to talk about what happens next." Marcus braced himself for demands or conditions, but David's next words surprised him completely. "I'm going to return Wellington Holdings to you," David announced calmly. Marcus stared at him in shock. "What? Why would you do that?" "You won. You have every right to keep it." "Because keeping your company wouldn't accomplish what I really wanted," David explained. "I wanted you to understand the consequences of treating people badly. I wanted you to learn that wealth without character is meaningless. I think you're beginning to understand those lessons." "But you could make billions from Wellington Holdings," Marcus protested, still unable to believe what he was hearing. David shook his head. "Mr. Wellington, my family's companies already make billions. We don't need your money. What we wanted was for you to become the kind of person who wouldn't spit on a guard doing his job." Marcus felt tears threatening again. "I don't deserve this generosity." "You're right, you don't," David agreed bluntly. "But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what kind of person you choose to become going forward. Losing everything taught you humility. Now I want to see what you do with a second chance." David pulled out a folder containing legal documents. "There are conditions, of course. Shen Industries will retain a minority ownership stake to ensure proper oversight. You'll implement the workplace reforms your board was demanding. Most importantly, you'll establish a foundation dedicated to supporting public servants and their families." Marcus read through the documents with growing amazement. The terms were far more generous than anything he would have offered an enemy. David was essentially giving him back his life's work, while requiring him to use it more responsibly. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked again. "Because punishment without the opportunity for redemption teaches nothing valuable," David replied. "My grandfather always said that the measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals, but how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. You failed that test spectacularly, but everyone deserves a chance to retake it." Over the next hour, they discussed the details of the transition and the new policies that would govern Wellington Holdings. Marcus found himself genuinely interested in David's ideas about corporate responsibility and employee dignity. For the first time in years, he was thinking about business in terms of how it could benefit others rather than just himself. As their meeting concluded, David stood to leave. "Mr. Wellington, I hope this experience has taught you something valuable. You have intelligence, energy, and resources. Use them to build something meaningful rather than just profitable." Marcus stood as well and extended his hand. "David, I want you to know that I understand now. What happened at the palace wasn't just an insult to you personally. It was an insult to everything you represent. Service, dignity, choosing duty over personal gain. I hope someday I can prove that I learned from your example." David shook his hand firmly. "I hope so too. And Marcus, my offer stands if you ever want to visit the palace again. But next time, maybe you'll see the guards as people doing important work rather than decorations to be ignored." As David walked away, Marcus remained standing beside the cafe table, watching him go. The young man who had just returned a billion-dollar company walked with the same humble confidence he had shown while standing guard at the palace. He had demonstrated more genuine power in showing mercy than Marcus had ever wielded through intimidation. Marcus Wellington returned to his office that afternoon a changed man. The company was still his, but he no longer saw it as a trophy to display his superiority over others. Instead, he began to view it as a responsibility, a chance to create value for employees, communities, and society, rather than just shareholders. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Old habits died hard, and Marcus had to consciously remind himself to treat people with dignity rather than dominance. But gradually, Wellington Holdings became known as a company that valued its workers, contributed to its communities, and operated with integrity rather than just profit maximization. Years later, Marcus would look back on the day he spat on a royal guard as the worst moment of his life, and also the most important. It had cost him everything he thought mattered, but it had given him the chance to discover what actually did matter. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the respect earned through treating others with dignity. And sometimes, when he walked past the palace on his way to work, Marcus would nod respectfully to the guards standing at their posts, remembering the day one young man's grace and wisdom had saved his soul.